Yes, thank you everybody for coming tonight. I'm so happy to see so many familiar faces and new faces too. As Janice said, this is going to be a roundtable discussion this evening, and we have three amazing, well, I should say four, but I can't call myself amazing because, you know, that's whatever. But okay, so we have award-winning photographers, women who are going to each present their work and their latest book. And then they're going to talk a little bit about the publishing process. So as Jason said, we welcome all questions. This is a roundtable. We've had a few of these at LACP and they've been really successful, where our members, and this is another perk of membership, talk about their publications and they talk about just the experience of getting a book published. So I've asked each of them to just speak briefly about the project, but we will be putting in the chat their websites and how you can get a book if you are so inspired by tonight's presentation. I am going to start us off. I'm just going to give everybody the briefest of bios. So again, if you want to learn more about the panelists tonight, you should go to their websites or their Instagram pages. And I almost forgot who's up first, but now I remember. So I actually know all three of the women speaking tonight, and I've known them for a little while. But Fran Foreman is coming to you from my home city of Boston, Massachusetts, and she's going to be up first. And Fran Foreman's photo paintings have been exhibited widely, both locally and internationally. She creates images out of fragments of her original photographs, which are captured during extensive travels. And you're going to learn more about Fran starting right now. So let's give it up for Fran Foreman.
Thank you, Sarah. I will share my screen. This book is called The Rest Between Two Notes. It was launched exactly a year ago, March 12th, the worst possible day for a book launch, because it's the day that the world, as we had known it, closed down. The book is 11 by 11. It's 224 pages, 110 color plates with spot varnish, text by 33 writers, including Sarah Hadley, foreword by Paula Tognerelli, an essay on collage, a poem, and an afterword. And this was the first book that I had published, which was a very different way of publishing, because in those days, in 2014, the publisher handled all the cost. Nowadays, the artist is required to provide part of the cost. This is my first book, Escape Artist, The Art of Fran Foreman. But I'll be talking today about The Rest Between Two Notes. The title is based on a poem by Rilke. I'll briefly read it. It says, "I am the rest between two notes which are somehow always in discord, because death's note wants to climb over, but in the dark interval, reconciled, they stay there trembling, and the song goes on beautiful." So in reviewing the work that I had produced over the last 5 to 7 years, I came to understand that there was an overarching theme of my work, and most of it had to do with the in-between state, tension, transition, solitary versus connected, liminal spaces, shadow and light, history, and now. And I pulled together my images and basically started to see that these images not only had one overarching theme, but there were themes within the overarching theme. One of the reviewers said the images featured in the book are presented thematically. These themes could be broadly interpreted, but easily could fall into categories such as allegory, folklore, portraits, portals, and passages, architecture, landscape, internal psychological reflection, or whimsical fantasy. So that kind of summed it up. Sarah wanted us to talk a little bit about the progression. So the way that I started was by doing mock-ups. I have a background in design. So I had pulled together these very rough layouts. And I was concerned, since I knew I'd be having a fair amount of text, I was concerned about cohesively integrating the text with the image. So started playing around with different makeups and layouts. And then in working with the publisher, came up with different ideas for the cover. These were various different options looking at one of the different images for the cover, as well as the fonts and the layout for the title. The publisher wanted something that was very bright and very colorful, but I objected to that because I didn't feel that it really represented my work sufficiently. So I insisted on this particular image, which is also in the book, for the cover. He agreed, and then it just became a chance of looking at, again, various different fonts and layouts of the text for the title. This was the final cover. And this book is divided into 5 sections. And each section has different thematic ideas, which I was talking about, between light and shadow, together and apart, history and presence, missing and meeting, reality and illusion. This is the book. It's big, it's heavy. The book cover, jacket, the paper jacket. And what's a little bit different about my book is that I wanted it to be seen as a conversation between the artist and the viewer. So I thought a lot about this. And as Todd Hito has said, the real story in photography happens outside the frame, in the viewer's mind when they look at it. So basically, this is another passage from a reviewer. What I wanted was to invite various different people who had commented on my work in the past to pick an image from the book that they found interesting enough to comment on in one way or the other. And the texts are written by 33 people, writers, artists, curators, photographers, various people connected with the arts or the sciences, and also a former prisoner, a man who had been exonerated after 32 years in prison. This wallpaper is an element that is used in the end papers of the book, but it's also used in chapter 3, which is the history section. So these are just a few shots from the book and a couple passages from various different reviews. The physicality of the book is also notable, printed end sheets of a warm tone, golden hued pattern reminiscent of Victorian wallpaper. And when the book is closed, the cranberry colored edges of the pages remind me of a slice of red velvet cake. This is the title page. And the interior title page, this is where I sign the book, and the table of contents spread. And this is the first page of section 1, between light and shadow. Each section has a detail from one of the images. And this is an image that Sarah Hadley had generously offered her text, which is adjacent to the image. This is text written by the prisoner, Victor Rosario, who I mentioned a little bit a while ago. And it was interesting, the images that he chose to write about all suggested the idea of imprisonment and freedom. One of the reviewers said, Foreman's scenes are rich in color, dramatized, saturated, theatrical, and struck me as an amalgam of paintings from the Italian Renaissance, come Joyce Tennyson, come David Lynch. I had to include that because I just loved it. It's another 2-page spread. This is a poem that accompanies this image. And not every image or every spread has text. If there was ever a time for me to relinquish judgment based on style and embrace images which are largely based on fantasy, it is now. Case in point, an image of a 3-story giraffe standing in a cavernous interior space reminiscent of ruined porn photography lit from various mystery light sources while a figure plays a trombone. And that refers to this image. This text was written by a psychologist. Chapter 2, beginning spread. another story written by a writer, a playwright in Boston. Double page spread. A haiku. A poem written specifically for this book by a poet here in Boston. The beginning of chapter 3, which is basically a portrait gallery. And this is where the wallpaper that's used as end room comes into play, because we saw this as separate from the first two and last two sections. It's really like a portrait gallery in a museum, which does in fact incorporate wallpaper. So I used the wallpaper with the imagery and incorporated it into some of the layout. The wallpaper was shot at various different museums around the country, and it was a little bit weird because I'd go into a museum room and somehow stick my camera up in front of the wallpapers, but I was able to get what I wanted. This chapter is obviously devoted to historical figures as well as contemporary. It's basically about reclaiming history. Chapter 4, there's also a short text, but for each section, somewhere between arrival and departure, there is a moment of bliss. And this section is in fact between meeting and leaving. Another poem to accompany this. An interesting analysis of the idea of departure. And then chapter 5, realism is a bad word. I see no line between the imaginary and the real. And that's from Fellini. This is the spread that introduces chapter 5, between reality and illusion. A short story written by a very well-known novelist. Jamie recognizes the model, my muse. This is another poem written by a filmmaker. And a haiku. Last image, the wallpaper, brings us to the end of the book, rife with unexpected combinations of ancient and modern elements, and with influences as disparate as Hopper, Vermeer, and Magritte. Foreman's photomontages are poised between reality and illusion, connection and isolation, betwixt light and shadow. Various reviews of the book. One of the ways I was able to fund part of the book was by offering these special limited editions. That's it.
Fantastic, Fran. Unbelievable. What a masterpiece. That was just incredible.
Thank you.
We are going to just keep going, but I hope you all have lots of questions for Fran. That was a wonderful presentation. And next up, we have Carolyn Campbell. Carolyn is a writer and photographic artist based in LA, who also, and I should say, owns her own PR firm. She is also, and I just found this out today, an authority on funerary symbols and the sculpture and architecture of 19th century cemeteries, where she spent a lot of time. We'll see this in just a minute. And Carolyn won recently an artist grant from the City of West Hollywood for her City of Immortals project, which is actually far more than a book. So she's going to tell us all about it and show it. And Jason is actually going to be the one.
Great. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to the LACP for asking me to participate this evening to discuss my debut book, City of Immortals, Père Lachaise Cemetery, Paris, that was published by Goff Books. The book had a really circuitous kind of birthing. In early 1981, I was working as the director of PR and events at the Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. And the museum conservator at the staff meeting pulled me aside. He moonlighted as a travel agent. Nobody makes any money in museums. So he was a travel agent. And he said, somebody just canceled on a round trip to Paris on this charter. Would you like the ticket? I'll just charge you the tax. Well, needless to say, that was a yes. And later that week at an exhibition opening, an artist friend said, oh, I heard you're going to Paris for the first time. You have to go to Père Lachaise Cemetery. And I said, graveyards really aren't my thing. And he said, oh, no. Aren't you a big fan of Oscar Wilde? And I said, yes. He said, my ancestor, Sir Jacob Epstein, designed the tomb of Oscar Wilde, who was buried in Père Lachaise. Needless to say, I had my first destination. On my first visit that October, I just became mesmerized by the cemetery. The following year, I asked a fellow photographer, Joe Cornish, if he would join me in Paris and to create what I envisioned to be kind of a nostalgic photo album of this Elysium of the afterlife. At the time, Joe was taking photographs of rock musicians and doing portraits, but he had a wonderful eye and a terrific technical skill. And we were really good friends, so I thought this would be a good partnership. I thought that originally I'd do all the research and the writing and Joe would cover the photography, but as it turns out, I ended up doing both. Plus I art directed Joe's work for the book we were conceiving. Well, 3 decades later, I'm still captivated by the place. I am totally mesmerized by the ongoing stories I've discovered about the cemetery. And oddly enough, my and Joe's equipment has evolved with the technology over the decades. Initially, I used my small Nikon FG, shooting mainly black and white. Then I used an Olympus camera and my Samsung phone, and probably the last couple of years, a Canon EOS 70D. We shot in black and white. We also shot in Ektachrome slide film, 4x5 transparency. And in 2018, our last photo shoot together, we shot everything digitally. So Joe made about 3 trips over the years, and I probably made about twice that many. And in the interim, I moved from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles for a PR position with the American Film Institute. As Sarah said, I now have my own independent PR firm. I logged about 80 hours in the cemetery. It's 107 acres. You have to be in really good shape. It has 1,000-foot elevation there. And my focus was the landscape. It is a beautiful, some 5,000 trees are there, peppered along with the architectural and sculptural treasures that I came across. There is an avenue of tombs. I think, there you go. And you'll see there's just, again, if you can imagine, this is the height. And I had no idea that Père Lachaise is the world's most famous cemetery. The leading architects and designers and sculptors of that period in Paris were commissioned by wealthy families to create these. There were the tombs of Arbelow, who was memorialized staring in the disembodied face of his wife. The surrealistic poet Georges Rodenbach, who has a rather alarming tomb if you aren't aware that he's breaking the top of his crypt. There's also fascinating funerary imagery that is throughout the cemetery. The female mourning figure, which is a very classic, the la douleur, or the symbol of grief. And so many great natural images, like this one is my favorite, the bat design, which is symbolizes the afterlife and so forth. I focused in the book on the graves of 84 cultural icons, and these included dancer Isadora Duncan and artist Theodore Jericho. For those who know his paintings in the Louvre of the Raft of the Medusa, and also Jim Morrison of the Doors. How could I forget? Many of the tombs and monuments were designed by notable artists and architects, and it's really kind of like an open air museum of sculpture and architecture. In my opinion, fall is really the prime season to shoot. The yellow and orange foliage is sharply contrasting with the solemn tombs and the iron railings, plus the light filtering through lattice trees above. The romantic section shot here by Joe Cornish really illustrates this amazing density of nature and death, really. Again, it's an enthralling environment if you get to visit. This coming shot of the composer Chopin was shot at dusk one fall, very close to closing time. And if you don't get out by the time the bell rings, you are locked into the cemetery. But this could not be captured at any other time but the fall. I shot only once in spring because I really wanted to see what all of the wonderful blossoms from the trees and all the foliage. But unfortunately, nature tends to obscure the tombs, and you don't really get these kinds of pictures because due to the time change, the cemetery closes long before nightfall and dusk. The book is about 200 pages. It covers the history of the founding of the cemetery. I have imagined conversations with a lot of the individuals who are buried there. And I also offer 3 tours. And tucked in the back of the cover of the book is a map that I designed, which focuses on particularly the cultural icons I mentioned. None of my access over these decades would have been possible had I not had the cooperation of the French consulate here in Los Angeles, the American embassy in DC that made all these diplomatic introductions. It's again, Père Lachaise is a public cemetery. There's a lot of bureaucracy associated with shooting there. And also, all those years in Paris, I had the pleasure of getting to work with the photography archivist at the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, as well as a lot of historians and city officials who were really enamored with the fact that an American photographer wanted to document the cemetery. Again, in the 80s, Père Lachaise really hadn't hit its height. It's now, I think, the 4th most popular destination in Paris. So most of all, I'm really grateful for the hospitality of my Parisian and American friends who live in Paris. So Sarah has asked that I talk about the book's publishing process and the PR and marketing. But before I do that, I wanted to say, Jason will post, I think, in the end of the overall talk, a 20% discount on my book for signed copies that Golf Books is going to make available. And there's going to be a promo code that you can use. So thanks for everybody's support. Let's see. Sarah asked, who designed the book and how much input did I have on the choices, like the fonts, the cover, the paper type, etc.? Well, Golf Books had an in-house person. They're based in Northern California, and she was also the designer. And I was really grateful that we are on the same time zone, because that isn't necessarily the case with a lot of publishers. The original designer, who had to drop out due to eye surgery, was based in Buenos Aires, and that I think would have presented a lot of challenges. I was really grateful that my whole team was here on the West Coast. My contract, God love my attorney, stipulated that I had final approval on all aspects of the book, from the cover to the paper to the font, and it all went really very smoothly. We all agreed on making it a paperback book for ease of use when traveling. The scale of the book, it's about 6 by 9, here you go, is perfect for tucking into a backpack. And the map is nestled into the back cover. It's quite small, but it folds out to 16 by 19 inches. And not unlike Fran, I added the silk ribbon bookmark, which I always prefer to have in a book instead of a paper bookmark, especially when I'm traveling. Sarah also asked, how was it working with the publisher? Did I go on the press? Well, Gordon Goff's first words to me, even before we signed the deal, were, I want to make you a beautiful book. So we were really off to a great start. Goff Books is an imprint of Oro Editions, which specializes in architecture, design, travel, and photography. So we were in sync on many levels, seeing as all of these topics were the exact subjects I covered in the book. We signed in late 2018 with a deadline of a final edited manuscript and images by March of 2019 for an October 2019 launch. The book was printed in China, and Trump's closing down business with China was a bit scary, but the books got shipped out just in time. Literally, the next shipment did not make it out. The process was pretty seamless. I had color proofs sent to me from China, and then I forwarded them on to Joe in the UK. And when the galleys came, I sent Joe the pages where his work appeared. So we were all, basically really tightly coordinating, because there was a lot of moving parts. There's 200 images, all my different texts. How did I market and promote the book once it was published, and what was most effective and gave me the most value? Well, being in PR, I knew I needed to hire a publicist. I myself was going to be busy booking all of the signings. Goff Books did supply a fair amount of marketing support, but not even my friends who were signed with Simon & Schuster say, be prepared to do your own PR. So I hired a colleague for 6 months who I closely strategized with in advance on both traditional and social media. Interestingly enough, I interviewed quite a few publicists. Some only did social media, some only did traditional press, but this particular publicist did all three, so I was happy. What really set me off on a great start was I was accepted into the authors series at the City of West Hollywood, and they hosted my launch in their beautiful city council chambers there on San Vicente Boulevard in that large auditorium. It was standing room only, and Book Soup sold out. Plus, the LA Times named the book #2 on their bestseller list that following week. I got a full-page story on page 2 of the Sunday Los Angeles Times as a result of the campaign, along with some national coverage. And the signings continued in Los Angeles and in San Francisco with plans to head to the East Coast. Then, boom, not unlike Fran, the pandemic hit. And I thought it spelled disaster, but I was wrong. Zoom is a blessing in disguise for reaching much larger audiences. And what was the most value that I found in the promotion? I belonged, but oddly enough, in it's kind of finding your people. And believe it or not, the Facebook has some 12 cemetery groups. One of them has membership of 20,000 people. And I've been a member of that group since it was at 10,000. So I know a lot of these people, plus the administrators. So Facebook has been, again, they invite me to do excerpts from the book. I do the same on Instagram. And my lecture events also have engaged really large audiences by targeting the people who would be interested. And that's, for me, it's the French, Vive la France, and architecture and design organizations. The Alliance Française in Washington, D.C. had over 300 people on their Zoom event. And tonight is photography. So I really also found out that many bookstores will probably rely on me to bring the crowds in, and not so much. I found out early on that the bookstores have their mailing lists, but it's really up to the author photographer to fill the house. And I realized I just jumped over how I found my publisher. And I want to note this because Joe Cornish and I had discussed many possible publishing deals with several presses over the years, but none of them really were a good fit. My first literary attorney was a godsend. One small independent publisher gave us a wonderful deal, but they wanted to own all the images. And I said, well, no, that's not going to work. So obviously my attorney advised that we turn that deal down, and we did. In the 1990s through the present, my PR practice has kind of bankrolled my trips to Paris, both my photography and my research. So I began working with a cartographer in designing a map, because I kind of put the book aside and said, what do I really want to explore first? And the map was really necessary. There wasn't a map of Père Lachaise, believe it or not, since it's over 200 years old. And so I took my photographs, my design skills, and created this map, which I began to sell off my website. And it focused on all of these artists. And for those who don't know, that including the legendary Nadar is buried there. So it was the map really that led to the book deal. In September of 2018, long before I had met Gordon Goff, over tea one afternoon with the esteemed LA author and architecture critic Michael Webb, he was interviewing me for a story about the map and the genesis of it for a design magazine. And at the time, I was also doing a GPS app for tablets and iPhones. And he said, you have so much material, why don't you do a book? And I said, yeah. Who doesn't want to have a book? Yes, got any ideas? And he said, well, yes, I do. I'd like to introduce you to my publisher. Well, my dream came true when Michael generously offered me an introduction to Gordon Goff. And after reading my proposal to Gordon, he offered me the publishing deal. So, and here we are today. So thank you very much.
Amazing, amazing story. Thank you so much, Carolyn. And yes, for all of those who don't know, on her website, yes, you can see the map, and then you can download this onto your phone and tablet, and it's an incredible book, and you can see a lot of the photographs that way too. So moving right along, next up is Jamie Johnson, who many of you know and who I've known for a long time. She's an LA-based photographer who specializes in documentary projects of children from around the world. Jamie also creates wet plate collodion images that are more conceptual, but still with childhood and children as the central theme. Her work has been exhibited widely and collected internationally. So welcome, Jamie.
I'm a little nervous. I'm not a great talker. I'm just going to tell you my story and share my pictures, and hopefully you'll have questions. So let me share my screen. So I have been documenting children for over 20 years now. I worked full-time as a commercial photographer doing children's clothes or ads or stuff, but I also do a lot of traveling. And I shoot India, Cuba. I'm always somewhere shooting something. And in 2014, I went to Ireland, and I was really super excited to find out who these Irish travelers were, because I love gypsies, and I'm really drawn into the whole world of carnival. So I got there, and I straight away started, finding these incredibly lovely, wonderful children. This is John. He was actually born with only one eye. And I don't even know how I got so embedded in so many of these children's lives, and their moms and their dads and their cousins. And I ended up going back year after year. And normally I have two children. So normally we take 2 trips a year. I do a family trip where I take them somewhere and we do something fun. And then I have the mom trip where I leave my family behind and I just shoot what I want to shoot. And I travel to India or somewhere, and I just spend some time alone with my camera and hopefully beautiful faces, because I don't really shoot landscapes or animals. I just love people so much, and I love meeting new people, and I love faces. And I look at John, I mean, how could you not love him? And I started really understanding the culture of the women and, the children, and they're Catholic, but they dress like they do, and they get married young, and they have a lot of kids. And it was, that's Biddy. And I didn't ever really think about making a book. And I kept going back, and people kept saying, well, why don't you make a book? I didn't want to make a book. I didn't know how to make a book. It just seemed like something that, you know, I could never possibly do. And then I met Bradley. This is Bradley. And he was tough little boy. And I talk a lot when I'm shooting kids. I talk all the time. And I'm like, you know, what'd you have for breakfast? What happened at school? What's your Halloween costume? Like, I'm like in it with all of these kids. And I had said to Bradley, I was like, what happened? You know, I said, you know, did you get bullied at school? Because Irish travelers are discriminated against massively, and they are bullied and picked on. And it's a huge culture of hatred. It's really horrible actually to watch because they're kids. And Bradley looked me in the eye right when I took that picture, and he said, yeah, I get bullied at school. So what? I get bullied at home too. And I thought, I need to make a book. And I just shot my cover. And I was with my friend, and I showed her the back of my camera. I was like, that's the cover of my book. And she said, you said you're not ever making a book. I was like, well, now I have to make a book because of Bradley and because of what he said to me. And now so I came home and I said, I don't know how to make a book. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. And I started going through. So I've been for 5 years, like at least twice, sometimes 3, sometimes 4 times a year, a back and forth to Ireland, shooting these lovely, gorgeous, wonderful children, Charlotte. And I know everybody that I've ever taken a picture of. I'm not the paparazzi. I'm like really interested in Charlotte's jewelry and her story. And so I went on this venture to make a book. So somebody said, look at all the books you like, and then find out who the publisher is, and find things that appeal to you, that are, you know, talk to your friends that have books. So I had 4 friends that had beautiful books, and they were all with the same publisher. So I was like, there you go. That's where I need to be. And so I very nicely reached out to all of my friends, and I said, you know, could you like maybe put a good word in for me or say something? Because I'm going to make a book, because I met this kid named Bradley with a black eye. And all of them wrote letters to Alexa Becker of Cara Verlag. And they said, my friend Jamie, she's got these Irish traveler kids. She wants to make a book, whatever. And Alexa reached out to me, and she said, you know, I don't know who you are, but you know a lot of people I know, and they all say you want to make a book. So what do you got? And I said, well, I've got these Irish traveler kids, and I have spent all this time. And she was really honest. And she said, we get Irish traveler, like, people sending us pictures, you know, we're hit up all the time, and we always say no. Like, so we will look, and, you know, we'll give it an open heart, but we're going to say no. So bring us something we've never seen, like show us something that, you know, we don't know. I was like, oh crap. So she said, oh, and I need it by Tuesday because we're having a board meeting. So I went through all my pictures, and I edited them. I hired this lady named Gail Fisher, who lived in Santa Barbara, and she came and she said, just print everything at CVS and throw it on the dining room table, get out of the house, and I'm going to like pick all the best ones, and I'm going to do a sequencing and all this stuff, right? So, you know, for a mere $180 an hour, this woman came to my house and went through my life and put this beautiful PDF together. And I didn't have a story. It was a lot of kids and a lot of stuff. And I thought, okay, well, I've got like 16 hours before this board meeting in Germany. So I started going through video of that I had taken of the kids, because I take a ton of just like, you know, really bad iPhone video because I have children at home, and I want, when I get home, I want to like bring them like presents from other kids. So I like, Priscilla, say hi to my daughter Violet, you know, tell her about your life. So I have hundreds of hours of video of kids going, you know, I live in this place and I love my house, and I don't care if people don't like travelers. And just, so I started playing all the video and matching it up with the pictures in the book. And so I would put the picture, and then I would look everywhere if I had any video of that kid. And a lot I didn't, and a lot I did. So I sort of matched the words, what they said to me while I was taking their picture. And then I like put it all together and I got it like to Germany like 20 minutes before the board meeting. And that was May 2nd, 2019. And May, June, July, August, I was like, well, clearly that sucked. No, they weren't interested. And I think like early August, Alexa reached out and she said, it was unanimous. We want to make your book. And so I was like, yay. And, there's the money and all the contracts and I didn't know what I was doing. I just trusted them and I trusted everything they said. And I just said, I'm just going to throw myself in and do whatever you say. And they were great and they were honest and wonderful and loving. And they get me this great designer. We worked all this stuff out. And then it came to the cover. So this is the book, by the way, in case you haven't seen it. And they really wanted this cover picture of this cute little girl, Chucky, and her cute little fluffy pony. And they're like, this is the cover. And the marketing department was like, that's the cover. We need a cute kid and a cute pony or no one's going to buy your book. And I said, but I only made this book for Bradley. Like, I want this. And they said, we want this. And we went back and forth. And then they gave it to me. And I was like, yes. And so that was very exciting. So with all that said, let's flip through some of these pictures. These are some of the pictures from the book. I'm sure I'm talking too much. I've timed myself. So.
You're fine, Jamie.
Okay, good. And so these are all my little kids. Tommy. Like, I love all these kids. This is Willie and his grandpa. His dad died of cancer. And so he lives with his grandma and his grandpa. His mom ran off with someone else. Like I know all of these kids and I know all of their stories. So it's a very personal project for me. But I went to Germany and I watched them print my book, which was amazing. And it was February 20th. 2020, and hung out in Heidelberg. I watched how everything happened. It was the best. And if anyone is ever making a book, go wherever it's at, just watch it. And you see everything come out and you have to sign off on it and look, and like, that was my book. And I was like, and as I was leaving Germany, February 26th, and I got to the airport and they're like, have you been to China? And I was like, no, I've been to Germany. And they're like, all this stuff is happening. And I didn't know anything because, I had German television. I don't speak German. I got back to America and basically the pandemic hit. My book was like in press. It was debuting at APAD New York. I had a book signing at 2:00 on April 3rd in New York. It's canceled. Arl canceled. Paris Photo canceled. And so it was like a lot of hype and I was sad, but the book sold out. So the European sales, it came out July 27th and in Europe it was sold out by September. And then and in America, there's some on Amazon. You can get them in some various stores, but the distributors completely sold out and I didn't have one freaking signing. I had no events, but it's here. It was really a lot of heart and soul went into it and I am very proud of it. And that's my whole story.
Amazing, Jamie. I have this wonderful book and I still didn't know some of the stories that you just told about the cover. I didn't know that whole story about how you fought for it.
I
so
fought for that because that was the only reason. This is Klaus. He owns it. And that's me and my kids in the book, not my kids, the book kids.
Right.
So.
Amazing, amazing work. Thank you for sharing it. And now I'm going to switch hats, which is going to be a little bizarre. And I wish I could just stay in the moderator hat because I'm actually going to talk about my own book. It's much easier to talk about other people's work. But I am going to go ahead and today is actually an auspicious day. I woke up this morning to the bells ringing all over Venice. Not, of course, I'm here in Los Angeles, but on Instagram, and apparently today is the celebration of the 1600th anniversary of the city of Venice. It was built in 421. Well, just think about that for a second, living in Los Angeles, that's just like a million years. So the other auspicious thing is that the word quarantine comes from Venetian. It is from the word quaranta, which means 40. And it's because Venice has survived many plagues. And during the plague, they actually made merchant ships quarantine on outlying islands for 40 days. So here we are. But my love of Venice started at a very early age, as you can see here. I'm in San Marco Square with my brother and my father. But it was mostly nurtured by my childhood growing up at the Gardner Museum in Boston. My father was the director of the museum, and along with his job came the apartment, which is on the 4th floor of the museum, and where we lived from when I moved there when I was 4, and we moved out when I was 23. It was an extraordinary place to grow up. Sorry, I'm going back and forth here. And fueled my imagination to become an artist. My father's job took us to Venice quite a bit. And later, when I was disillusioned with college, I decided to apply to become an intern at the Peggy Guggenheim collection. This is Peggy Guggenheim here. And her palazzo was on the Grand Canal. I subsequently worked at the Biennale in Venice and as a nanny on the Lido. Each time I was entranced by the city, its endless maze of passageways and canals. And it was in Venice where I first started photographing seriously. Sorry. My father died very unexpectedly when I was about 25, and it shook me so much that I actually quit my job at the National Gallery and started studying photography. In 2006, I decided I wanted to do a project about this city, which had been such an important place in my life and where I had taken my first steps as a photographer. So I went with the intention of making a project, but I knew I wanted to make it a personal one. On one of my first nights there, I saw a man walking over a bridge on a misty night, and I thought I'd seen a ghost. He looked so much like my father. It was an incredible moment, and that image became the seed of my project. After that, I envisioned the project as a search for my father. He loved Venice as I did, and he vanished from my life so suddenly that it seemed natural to try to find him there. The Venice I'm presenting is part illusion and part memory. The peaceful city I knew and loved with my father is long gone, and I was trying to create images of an ethereal and mythic Venice. I also began to realize that I was talking about the loss of the Venetian way of life and the erosion I was witnessing around me. Venice is a city in constant decay and transition because of its saltwater foundations and because of the influx of visitors. I shot the project over several years, and each time I photographed from morning until night and stayed away from crowds and tourists to capture the quieter and more contemplative city that I had known. I traveled in late fall and often shot at night or in the fog. I always felt the need to create an homage to this place since it had inspired me so much creatively. So even though my trips were tinged with sadness, I kept returning as a means to reconnect with my father and my past. I had spent many years of my life in Venice, and it echoed the Gardner Museum. So I felt at home wandering the streets by myself and taking boats to remote islands. And it was a journey of healing, and over time the work became much more than about grief and loss. It became about the impermanence and change we all experience. And it became a meditation on larger themes of death and rebirth, which we all experience throughout our lives. About 2 or 3 years ago, I decided I wanted to make a book of these photographs. And I first tried my hand at printing the work myself and having it bound, which I'll show you here. But this was very time consuming and costly. And so I decided I wanted to get the work out in the world through a traditional publisher. I had a lot of help from the beginning. Douglas Stockdale, Aline Smithson, Linda Morrow were very encouraging and all helped me to understand layout, because creating a book is really a different language, I have to say, and I really didn't even know where to begin. I sent out PDFs to publishers and I got a lot of nice emails back, but mostly silence. Then Jonathan Blaustein connected me with Caleb Kane Marcus, who's a wonderful designer and who some of you know because he's taught at LACP and been a reviewer. He's a great photographer himself, and he designed this beautiful book. He told me that he would take the book to Damiani, but there were no guarantees. He had a good relationship with them and he's had several books published by them. I was actually floored when they accepted the book, because I never thought an Italian publisher would want an American's view of Italy, but they did. I had total control over the size, the covers, and the fonts. And Caleb and I worked for about a year together. And I always wanted it to be a small book. I really just wanted it to be sort of like a book of poems or something that you look at every once in a while. And I meant to bring tonight, and it's downstairs somewhere in the craziness of my house, but I actually went, and I would suggest this to anybody who's thinking about doing a book. I went to just a printer here in Los Angeles. I just looked up printers. Once he had designed the PDF for me, and I had them printed out for me. And that was really helpful, because when you look at a book on screen and you look at the PDF, it looks wonderful and fantastic, but you have no idea what the physical thing is going to look like in your hands. So I did that, and I meant to, as I said, bring it, but I can answer questions if anybody's got any about that. I didn't have time to run a Kickstarter. This took about a year, and then of course everything gets crunched at the very end. So instead I just sold it through my mailing list. I pre-sold I pre-sold the book through my mailing list. And I also made a slipcover edition, which you see here, that came with a print, and that helped tremendously. I guess I'm at the end there. So I used Andrea Smith to do the PR for it in New York, and that was really, really helpful. And she got it in some magazines and out in the world a bit. But I will say also what Carolyn was saying earlier, that you really have to put your boots on the ground yourself to get your books out. Damiani did a little bit, but they didn't do much. And they told me early on that they didn't really have a PR department, so that it was up to me. And so that was fine. I used the marketing skills I've built up over Filter and LACP, and I sent the book out everywhere I could. Like Jamie, I was supposed to be in New York having my first book signing last April. I did have a small book signing, thankfully in December. The book came, and I'll say this is really unbelievable. The book showed up on my father's birthday on December 13th, the pallets of books. And I had a small book signing at Fabric Gallery here in Los Angeles before the world shut down. But like the others, I think that Zoom has actually been a godsend, and I've done a lot of talks and other things, and it's all worked out beautifully. The book is pretty much sold out from Damiani, but there's a couple still. I think there's 6 left on Amazon, and I have just a handful left here. So, okay, so I am going to switch back to moderator hat and say thank you to all our lovely panelists tonight. The work was amazing and incredible. And I'm sure there's a lot of questions in the chat. So Jason, do you want to jump in there?
There has been some back and forth in the chat with people asking, and then our lovely panelists responding in kind. So I don't know if
So
we
have a
wanna-
lot of the questions already been answered? I figured we
a
would sort of
little
go
bit,
through
a
the
little
questions,
bit,
even if
yeah. Which
they've
I
been
think
answered. We should
kinda
probably,
maybe start from the bottom and work our way up from
I
Todd.
see one that says advice for those trying to find a publisher for their first photo book. So, and I'm going to open that up to the panel. So, Fran, do you want to first take a stab at it?
Yeah.
I actually don't know. You told us how you found, you've had 2 books published. So how did
Right.
you find your publishers?
Well, the first time I was very lucky. The publisher actually came to me because I had been featured in another book among other photographers and artists, and the publisher saw that and just offered me a contract, which was terrific. But I don't think it happens so that was around 2013 or so, and that was Schiffer Publisher, who were great to work with. But it wasn't the same system as what I went through. This publisher was recommended, I was recommended to this publisher by another photographer named Tom Chambers. He had had his book published by Unicorn, and the person he was working with at Unicorn heard about me through Tom, and he came to Boston. The publisher came to Boston and gave me his song and dance about why I should work with him. I was considering another publisher at the time, but I eventually chose to work with Unicorn because they're British, and I thought that they would have a larger European contact. But things have happened since then. The pandemic definitely slowed down their ability to go to book fairs and so forth. And the person I was working with, the partner at Unicorn, left the company just as I was finishing up the book. So then I was kind of left holding the bag. But anyway, in both cases, I was lucky enough to have the publisher come to me.
So do you have any advice or no? wait, make a lot of great work and then wait for them to come to you.
Well, yeah, you could wait a long time.
Yes.
I was just really lucky. I think the best thing to do is to get your work out there so that it's seen. So my work had been in other publications, and that's how it happened to be seen. So that's my recommendation. Just get your work out there as many places as possible.
Okay. Carolyn, do you want to answer that too?
No, it's a certain amount of kismet, and I think that it really has to be part of your people. And the fact that I'd had this relationship with Michael Webb, he's got 28 books to his credit. I never once thought of asking Michael about the publishing. I just had this friendship with him. And so I think it's about, going to the art, going to the shows, cultivating your friends. And it's really about, they say, oh, it's who you know. Well, yeah, because people recommend you. I've gotten into exhibitions because I've befriended other artists who the curator said, do you know anybody who what we should include in this exhibition? And I'll say, oh yeah, Carolyn. And so, again, your network is really, and if you're a bit of a wallflower, you really need to get out there and be a people person, or at least have somebody with you. I would go arm in arm with friends, especially to the big book fairs. And I would introduce my friend to publishers, and then he would go around and introduce me. So we would help each other when we were too shy to do it to ourselves, for ourselves. So
that's a great strategy. Jamie, did you have any?
Well, like I had said, somebody told me, go look at books everywhere, go to a book fair and find books that you love, and, make note of the publisher. And, you see a book that you like and you think, oh, well, this is what I want, And when I made that PDF for Care, I sort of laid it out exactly how I imagined I wanted my book. And when they didn't get back to me for 5 months, my goal was to take that PDF and really find those books that I loved and send that PDF to the publisher. I never did that because it didn't get that far. but that was my plan. So that's what I would do again.
No, that's
for
good.
sure.
And actually, so I'm going to
Yeah.
answer that as the last one, is the person who probably sought a publisher for a while. I did do that. So I made a PDF of the work. I actually had a designer make the PDF. It looked really nice. And I did send it out to a lot of publishers. In the end, I did, and I didn't say this, Elizabeth Avedon teaches a class on photo making of your photo book. And she said to me, find a designer. And she said that to me really early on. Some publishers like to design their own books. Some publishers like you to come with a design book or to have an idea of how you want the book. And certainly they're also interested in the market, how you can, how you're going to promote it and what the market for such a book is. So you do have to do those sorts of research. Okay, so we have a lot of questions. I am going to start at the bottom. Sorry with everybody who asked them earlier. So somebody said, have you had any gallery shows in conjunction with your book? I'm sure the answer is probably no because of the pandemic, but nobody. I think that's something that, I mean, I'll just sort of say, I think that's something I thought that you needed to have was a big show and then you would sell books too. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I think almost all of us are almost out of books at this point, or we're still selling books, but we, at this point, it's not crucial to have a solo show along with your book. But it is something that usually.
Yeah, I just want to mention, because a lot of people were on hold and now people are starting to roll back and we're looking at fall 2021. I don't know, but the Lycée Français out on Pico has a gallery in their foyer and they want to offer me a show and a book signing. So it'll be the first exhibition.
Fantastic, good.
2 years after. But again, we're holding, crossing our fingers. And I think the art world is just going to burst forth and a lot of opportunities are going to be there. So good luck, everybody.
Okay. And Todd has a great question, which is, how did you go about getting someone to write the foreword? So, and Fran, you did more than ask people to get a foreword. You asked a lot of people, artists, friends, writers, everybody. So I don't know if you want to take a stab at that. Did you just ask people?
Well, I had Paula Tognarelli for years had been telling me to get a book together. So when I finally did, I just asked her if she would be willing to write the foreword, and she easily agreed. So that wasn't the problem. In terms of the text, what I did was send out a note to people who had commented on my work in the past, and I asked them. I said, I'm putting together a book. And would you be interested in responding to one image in the book or several images in the book? And I explained the concept of the book and what it was like. And then when I heard from people that they were interested, I made a secure website in which I posted the images that by then I had decided to incorporate into the book. And there were 110 images. And then I let the people know who would agree to do the writing if they would just go to the website and then pick the image that they wanted to respond to. And once they picked the image, I took it off the website, or I said it's already taken. So that way we didn't have duplicates. There were a couple of duplicates, but really only a few. And I had also made the decision that I would do no editing of any of the texts that people wrote, because these were their words, these were their thoughts. And the whole concept that I had was that art is a conversation between the viewer and the artist, as much as between the artist's mind and the artist's hand. And this was the viewer's writing. So I let them say whatever they wanted. There was an allowance for space because we had already designed the book. So there was only one case in which a writer had to reduce her story to 1 page as opposed to 3 pages, which it had been. But these were their words. And I was also very clear with the editor with the publisher who wanted to edit everything, that I didn't want him to do that. I didn't want him to touch. So the words that you see were the words that were written by these writers. And some are more literary than others. Some probably are more dynamic and more interesting. But again, it's people's response to the image. And that's what was important to me to get across.
And Jamie, do you want to talk about the foreword to your book?
Yeah, so not a lot of people know what an Irish traveler is or know the history or the story. And so the publisher thought it would be very important to have a historian write my foreword, not a museum or a photographer. They said we need, and I got it. So they did the research and they gave me a list of the 20 like biggest living historians on Irish travelers and Irish culture. So I scratched out all the men because I just wanted to have a female for some reason, and that left me 4. And then the number one, who was like the super expert of everything to do with Ireland and travelers, I wrote her this really nice letter and I sent her a PDF, and I waited and waited, and the publisher was on a deadline. They needed something. And so I, like 2.5, 3 weeks, I went to my number 2 person, which was Mary Burke. And she was immediately, she's like, I love everything about it. I'm in, I want to be a part of it. What can I do? How can I do it? Anything you need, which was great because she's a professor of Irish studies at the University of Connecticut. And she's written many books on travelers. So she was fantastic and she was great. So she started writing this thing and it was so good. And her and the publisher, they were all like best friends, everything. And then the lady number 1 came back to me. She was like, I'm in. I was like, oh crap. And I was like, I'm sorry, like we are on a deadline, and that was like a month ago and I needed somebody and I got somebody. And then she sent me a really mean, nasty message. So.
Oh no, that's terrible. What a terrible story. I'm so sorry.
There you go.
Oh well. And Carolyn, did you want to add anything to that, to the how
Well,
to find
I
somebody to
kind
write?
of got caught in the running out of time. I sent out requests for people for forewords, and I was still writing the book. I mean, I wanted 6 months to finish the book, and the publisher said, how about 3? And the center of the book are these imagined conversations with the dead. I mean, I knew Oscar Wilde's grandson and I knew members of the Doors, so I would recreate these conversations. And he said, I had a few. He goes, oh, I'd like to have 8. So I was writing up until the last minute. So the foreword didn't happen, but we're now going into a French translation. So we're negotiating with French publishers, and I'm definitely I think it's really going to be valuable. Again, an American doing, a French subject, to have a French person do a foreword. So I'll keep you posted.
Okay, and I'll just answer that question really quickly. I made a whole list of people, and it's something to think about when you're starting to do a book project. It was something early on. Somebody said to me, you're going to need to find somebody to write the foreword. I ended up having a foreword and an interview, so I kind of balanced 2 things. The foreword was written by Karen Haas, who's the curator at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, who, just by luck, again, I have known since I was 6 years old. She worked at the Gardner Museum. It was her first job in graduate school. And so I've known her, and her husband, Greg Hines, is a fabulous photographer for a million years. And I just said to her, I know you're super busy, but would you write the foreword? And she said yes, and was unbelievably gracious to do it. And then I had Susan Bernstein actually do an interview with me. It was her idea, not mine. She said to me, I think it would be better because then I can ask you questions and you can answer them, and we can sort of have a dialogue about what your experience being in Venice and also growing up at the museum was like. So, but it's something to think about when you're starting to put together your book or your idea for a book, is that you will need a foreword, usually maybe 2, an introduction and a foreword. So a historian or somebody who knows the subject, as well as somebody to write about the work. Jamie, you have a specific question. Do you have any advice for how to present yourself as a photographer to a community so that they welcome you and you get on board with your project?
Well, I'm a people person, so I'm super friendly. I love everybody, and I'm honest and open, and I never have any intention of exploiting or hurting. I want everyone to love their pictures and love what I'm doing, and I'm open for ideas, and I just sort of put myself out there to, I don't know. The travelers, that's a tough community, and I don't know. I got right in there on day one. You know, a little kid wanted to borrow my camera. I chased her. She chased me. We took pictures. She brought me home to meet her mom and her 9 sisters and then her 27 cousins. And I just really try and be honest and open and giving and just, I would never take a picture that no one didn't want me to take. So
And I guess I'm going to follow up and say, so did you, I think you said this before at some talk that I've seen, but did you talk to the kids when you were publishing the work? Did you get their okay? Did you get their input or at all, or?
Yeah. And the hardest part of this, which like hurts my soul, is the kids that are not in the book, but their sisters in the book and their brothers in the book. And it was edited, and I had like, there's one family, the Riley family, and you know, there's 9 of them, and 4 of them are in the book, and the others I love so much, and I'm terrified to explain to them why they didn't make the book, because it wasn't me. I mean, maybe I didn't take a great picture of them, maybe it was me, but it was an edit and it's a whole thing. And everybody that's in the book that has seen it, that, you know, we're on Facebook or Instagram, they're so happy. But I feel really horrible about the kids that didn't make the book.
Like, you can always make another book. That book too.
I sleep over it. I think, oh, it's just like I don't even want to tell them. I don't want to show it to them because then I feel sad. But everyone that's in it is happy and proud and excited about it.
We had a question and I can't find it right now, but it's something about the financial aspect of it. So does anybody want to talk about sort of I'm trying to think of where it was. I can't remember. Susan asked it a while ago. I mean, I think as Fran alluded to, the world has changed. Very few publishers will just publish your book outright. There's almost always buy-in from the photographer, and that buy-in can be offset by pre-sales. So I'm just going to say that's generally what happens, but if anybody else on the panel wants to talk about.
Yeah, I didn't do pre-sales, and my publisher didn't want me to do a crowdsourcing program, which I was relieved about because I didn't want to do it anyway. Every publisher is a little bit different, but I think in most cases they expect you to pay about half of the production. I ended up paying about a half of the production. So I basically covered the printing and the publisher covered the distribution, the organization. In hindsight, I think that they got a better deal out of it because their end of it was probably less costly than my end, than the printing. The printing is very expensive, and I had 1,000 copies printed and the book was 224 pages. So it's a pretty substantial printing cost. The way that I paid for it was that I got a grant. I had a donation from a collector, and I had a couple grants actually. And then when the book came out, I was able to sell about 25 limited special editions for a couple $100 each. And that didn't pay for all of it, but it definitely made it chunk into my costs. So that was helpful. I have one left out of those 25. So if anyone is interested for the remaining special edition, let me know. But it's very different. As I said, over the last decade, it's changed from the publisher being willing to pay for the entire project to basically you pay for half of it. I also want to mention, I think somebody else did, that they don't do any publicity. They do very little. They put the book into their catalogs. They take it to a few book fairs. Of course, that hasn't happened this past year because there are no book fairs. So the marketing and the promotion is completely on us, which has been more difficult this year. My signings and presentations were all canceled like everybody else's. So it's not for the faint of heart.
And Carolyn, did you want to say something about the financial?
Yeah, I heard from a lot of fellow authors that editing has really gone downhill because publishing houses have cut back on staff. And I read my friends' books, and I hate to sound, when you do a reprint, there's a typo on page 15, 16, and I welcome people to find typos, because then, I mean, I'm almost in my third printing now, so I'll catch it next time. But I wanted to have a really crackerjack editor, and they said, good, you can hire one. And then I also wanted an index in the back, because when people want to look, there's a lot of scholarly material in the book that references a lot of French history. So I wanted an index, and they said, well, you need to hire an indexer. But it was great because the indexer found typos. So I got the kind of text that I wanted, and so that was important, but I had to carry this cost. So yeah, it's a brave new world out there.
Yeah. Jamie, did you have any?
Well, I don't have money. I'm a single mom, and I work a lot. I did a print sale. So when I first they said yes, and then we needed a deposit to start, I did a print sale. I did it on Facebook, and Fran and several of you were kind enough to get a print, and it did really well. It paid for the first bulk of the book, of what I owed, or my portion, which was about half. I think it was pretty much, I pay half, they pay half. And then I did pre-sales for the book. So I sold 200 copies long before they ever actually existed, before there was a cover or a book. And that was it. I mean, it covered everything, and I would do it again. And yeah, so.
And I'll just add to that. So basically the answer is that with every publisher, it's a little bit different. And with every contract, it's a little different. With mine as well, there was a buy-in, or there was, they needed money up front to basically cover the printing costs. But they also give you books in return. So with my case with Damiani, the print one was 750, and I got 350 of the books shipped to me, directly to me, that I could do whatever I wanted with. So I sold a great deal of those. And then I also did this special edition and sold it with a print, like Jamie and like Fran and others. And that helped to cover the costs. And I think all the costs were covered. So pretty much, yes, they were covered. Somebody also said, were the people who wrote the forwards compensated? And in my case, I did give them, they didn't ask, but I did compensate both Karen and Susan. But actually, Susan wouldn't take any, but I offered.
I did not, and I didn't know if I should, or I had no advice, and so I didn't. But I figured if she asked, I would have, but she never asked, so I never did.
She probably got some books though, right? And a print, maybe.
No.
Nothing. Okay.
Actually, I'm doing a lecture with her at the Amherst University on Zoom next week. I'm terrified. So,
That'd be great.
But, yeah, but she's been lovely and just thrilled to be a part of it. So.
Oh, well then there you go.
But yeah, I didn't know what the protocol was. I had no idea.
That sort of leads into the next question, which somebody said, talking about Zoom and whether we think that Zoom will be continuing as a platform for sort of these book talks like this, and how it's been.
I hope it continues. I think it's been a saving grace for all of us. And it's made it possible for me to talk about my book and talk about my work around the world. So I certainly hope it continues. And also I think it's good for organizations like LACP and other museums and other galleries that are putting up the kinds of fabulous education that you guys are putting up. So I am definitely hoping that it continues.
Anybody else want to say anything?
Yeah, I've got an event on April 22nd. And again, Vive la France, the French Federation, they have 117 chapters across the US. So they're doing a broadcast and they are pitching me to the individual chapters. And this is all happening via Zoom. I couldn't be going to Chicago and to Boston. I mean, quite frankly, the money I saved due to COVID, I was going to have to fly to New York, fly to Baltimore, fly to Boston, stay in hotels. Zoom is $14.99 a month, right? I mean, again, as Fran said, the fact that you all are recording this and it's going to have a life beyond this, what a wonderful tool to share. So yeah, yay Zoom.
Somebody asked, what is the difference with a special edition copy? Does anybody want to?
Well, in my case, I have one here. I have one book left, and it's the book with a custom design slipcase with gold embossed printing on the outside of it, and it includes a signed print, and the print is from one of the images in the book. And it's limited. It's limited to 25, as I said.
That's about the same with me. Mine was limited to 50, and it came in a slipcase, and it also had a print. So
right, yeah, I think
you can sort of design it as you like. I think that sometimes the publisher wants to do it, sometimes you do it. It's open to, but generally it's a rare commodity, basically.
Exactly. Yeah.
And somebody said, can you just throw out some numbers of the financial investments? And I'm just sort of going to cover this for everybody because we've done 3 or 4 of these photo book roundtables. I would say that buy-in on the very low end is probably 15,000, and at the upper end about 40,000, depending on the size of your book, the bells and whistles that you want. There's all sorts of things that you find out about end papers, different colors, the side, the colors, the bookmark. I mean, everything is an extra and an additive. So it basically, it just depends on the publisher. It depends on what you want from your book. And I will say, just to that thing, I had looked into actually self-publishing my book, and if I had not found a publisher, I would have self-published it because I just wanted to get it out in the world. And we'll talk about that. We're going to have another one of these photo book roundtables in May, and I forget the exact date. Sorry, I will see if we can find that before the end of this event. But Hannah Kozak, I believe, self-published her book, but just to let you know, it was about $10,000 to self-publish it. I looked into printing it at Meridian Press in Connecticut. And the one thing you get when you have a publisher, even though they don't do a lot of PR, is you get distribution. So getting your book into bookstores around the country, around the world, is what you get with a publisher, because they, as Fran was saying, put it in a catalog that goes out to everywhere, libraries, bookstores all around the world, and those bookstores make their orders based on the catalog and the description.
Right, and they handle the distribution. I mean, if you want to keep 1,000 copies of a book in your living room, then you can distribute it on your own, but it's not something I want to take on.
Last question is, anything you wish you did differently? Or what did you learn from the experience? I guess, Fran, you've done 2. So what did you learn from the first one that you learned to know for the second one?
Well, from the first one, I learned not to design it again. I designed the first book, and it was very, very time consuming. So the second time around, I decided to hire a designer that I could work with. So I think that's the major thing I learned. What I learned from the second one is don't have your launch date on March 12th, 2020, because
hopefully there won't be a March.
So I was very lucky to get this event at the Strand Bookstore on March 12th, but nobody wanted to take the subway that day. So I think only 15 people came up. But fortunately, Julia Dean happened to be in New York at that time. So hi, Julia.
I was just going to say, Julia came, and she was
the moderator, and it was so much fun. It was actually much more intimate. It was much more fun. But I would hope that no one has to go through this.
That was 2 days before the world, Fran, that was 2 days before the world shut down. 2 days.
No, it was the day that it shut down in New York. They had just shut down Broadway and the Met, and the subways were starting to close.
Actually had that event. It's amazing.
And we still had the event, but it was very limited in numbers.
Yeah.
Right.
Carolyn or Jamie, quickly, just wanted anything you learned from the experience or that you would do differently next time?
I just say to anybody, it was a question earlier about how, don't ever give up, be persistent. I mean, I thought about the book 30 years ago, then I dropped it and worked on the map, and then I started doing other things and getting in exhibitions. just don't give up on it. And again, your publisher is your partner, so it's like a marriage. So make it work. So that's my
Find a good partner.
Yeah.
Jamie, anything?
Well, you know, I never wanted to make a book, and it was too daunting and never a goal. And now I feel like I want to make another one.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
like when there's no pandemic, I want to do it again. I really loved every bit of it. I wish I could have, you know, had any event. But I definitely would do it again. 100%. I would do it the same publisher, the same way. I have no regrets other than the pandemic.
I would
Okay.
say, I just
Thank
want to say
you.
that it's a little bit like being pregnant, because you just can't wait for it to be over, and it's so difficult. And when it was finished, I remember saying, I never want to do this again. It was like nothing else was going on in my life for the 18 months in which I was working on it. And like Jamie, I can't wait to do my next book now. So
I will concur. I feel the same way. It was a lot of work, a tremendous amount of work. My only piece of advice, which I gave earlier, was to make a little book maquette, but make it exactly the size and have the pictures and everything. It really, really helps to hold it in your hand to see it exactly. But yes, I would do it all again. It was, 18 months of work, but it's all worth it. It is like birthing a child out into the world, and you have no idea of what comes back to you. It's wonderful. So I really want to thank everybody for being here tonight. I want to thank Fran and Carol and Jamie really for sharing your stories and for showing your beautiful, beautiful work. In the chat, there's a place where you can find all of these fantastic books. I forgot to mention that my website is crazy and scary. Maybe I did. Anyway, don't worry about it. But get one of these wonderful women's books and treasure it. So thank you all for being here tonight. Thanks, Jason.